The Supreme Court has just delivered a major victory for the Second Amendment community with a unanimous 9-0 decision that effectively shuts down a major attempt to undermine the American firearms industry. This ruling came in the case of Smith Wesson versus Mexico, a high-stakes legal battle that had the potential to set a dangerous precedent. In this case, the government of Mexico filed a lawsuit against several of the largest American gun manufacturers, including Smith Wesson, Barrett, Century Arms, Colt, Glock, and Ruger. The lawsuit aimed to hold these companies responsible for violent crimes committed by drug cartels in Mexico, claiming that their firearms were used by criminals across the border. At the heart of the case was the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA. This federal law protects gun manufacturers and dealers from being held liable when their legally sold products are later used in criminal acts by third parties. Mexico's argument challenged this protection, attempting to open the door for foreign governments, and potentially others, to sue American gun companies for criminal actions they had no direct role in. Had Mexico succeeded, it would have unleashed a wave of lawsuits that could cripple the firearms industry nationwide. But the Supreme Court made it clear every justice, liberal and conservative alike, rejected the premise of the case. The court's 9-0 ruling affirmed that the PLCAA does, in fact, shield these manufacturers from such lawsuits. Justice Elena Kagan authored the opinion of the court, with Justices Clarence Thomas and Ketanji Brown Jackson each issuing separate concurring opinions. In the majority opinion written by Justice Elena Kagan, the Supreme Court explained why Mexico's lawsuit could not move forward. The justices unanimously agreed that the claims brought by the Mexican government did not meet the legal standard required to proceed under U.S. law, specifically under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA. The court held that Mexico failed to make a plausible claim that the U.S. gun manufacturers had aided and abetted gun dealers in the unlawful sale of firearms to Mexican drug traffickers. According to the ruling, the actions of the gun dealers did not fall within any of the exceptions to the PLCAA, and there was no convincing evidence that the manufacturers had knowingly assisted in any illegal activity. Mexico's complaint attempted to argue that these manufacturers knowingly sold firearms to dealers who were acting unlawfully. However, the court found this argument too vague and unsupported. Rather than identifying specific transactions or naming particular dealers involved in wrongdoing, the complaint made broad claims, accusing all the manufacturers of assisting some unknown group of rogue dealers. This lack of detail weakened the case significantly. To support such a serious claim, the court said Mexico would have needed to present strong, specific, and credible allegations showing a pattern of purposeful and illegal assistance. Instead, Mexico relied on a general assumption that some gun manufacturers knowingly sold to bad actors, without naming names or providing concrete proof. For example, the complaint did not identify any particular dealers who violated the law or offer evidence that manufacturers had access to such information. At most, Mexico alleged that manufacturers were aware that certain dealers had a history of unlawful behavior. But the court ruled that this kind of passive awareness, or indifference, does not amount to active assistance. Simply knowing about misconduct isn't enough to meet the legal threshold for aiding and abetting. The court also dismissed Mexico's secondary argument, that the gun manufacturers had failed to regulate the behavior of dealers in their distribution networks. While it might be good business practice for companies to monitor their supply chains more strictly, the law does not require them to do so to the point of assuming criminal liability. The court described this as passive nonfeasance, meaning a failure to act rather than direct involvement in wrongdoing, something that rarely qualifies as aiding and abetting in a legal sense. Mexico also raised issues with how the firearms were designed and marketed, focusing on so-called military-style weapons. But again, the court pointed out that these firearms are legal in the United States and are widely purchased by law-abiding citizens. The fact that cartels also use them does not make the manufacturers legally responsible. Similarly, firearms branded with Spanish-language names or references to Mexican culture were said to appeal to cartel members, but they are just as likely to be of interest to millions of Hispanic American gun owners. Even the claim that manufacturers failed to produce guns with tamper-proof serial numbers didn't move the needle. The court made it clear that none of these design or marketing choices amounted to the kind of intentional, coordinated effort required for an aiding and abetting claim. In short, the Supreme Court found that Mexico's lawsuit lacked the specific and plausible allegations necessary to hold U.S. gun makers responsible for crimes committed by cartels. The decision reinforces the legal protections provided to firearm manufacturers under the PLCAA and firmly closes the door on this particular legal strategy to push gun control through the courts. This section of the ruling is particularly notable because Justice Kagan, writing for the majority, openly acknowledges that firearms like the AR-15 and similar models are lawfully owned by millions of Americans. That recognition is significant. It could have long-term implications for future legal challenges related to rifles and other firearms of that kind. Kagan emphasized that the court's conclusion is in line with the core purpose of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA. When Congress enacted the PLCAA, its goal was to put an end to lawsuits seeking to hold gun manufacturers responsible for crimes committed by third parties using their products unlawfully. Mexico's lawsuit, the court explained, closely mirrors those kinds of legal efforts. While the law does contain what's known as the predicate exception, which allows certain cases to proceed when a manufacturer is shown to have violated a specific law applicable to gun sales or marketing, Kagan made it clear that Mexico's argument would stretch that exception too far. Accepting Mexico's interpretation, the court said, would effectively gut the law's protections and allow too many lawsuits to go forward under vague or sweeping claims. The court strongly doubted that Congress ever intended to create such a broad loophole in the PLCAA, and ultimately concluded that it did not. On that basis, the court reversed the decision made by the First Circuit and sent the case back. Justice Clarence Thomas also wrote a concurring opinion, agreeing with the outcome but offering an additional point. He stated that the court correctly ruled that Mexico had not plausibly shown its case fits within the predicate exception. That exception allows lawsuits to move forward only if the manufacturer has knowingly violated a relevant state or federal law governing the sale or marketing of firearms. Thomas emphasized that while the court found Mexico's specific claim insufficient, it did not decide the broader issue of what plaintiffs must prove in future cases to meet the predicate exception standard. In his view, it's not enough for a plaintiff to simply make an allegation. There may need to be a prior finding, either a legal judgment or a regulatory determination, that a violation actually occurred. Otherwise, defendants, including firearm manufacturers who have already been cleared in past investigations, could be forced to defend themselves against vague claims all over again. He cautioned that allowing mere allegations could unfairly expose companies to lengthy and expensive litigation, even when there is no prior finding of wrongdoing. This case was a major moment for reinforcing the legal protections provided by the PLCAA. It made clear that lawsuits like Mexico's, which attempt to hold gun makers accountable for the criminal acts of third parties, are not allowed under current law. Still, it's likely that new challenges will be brought in the future by those looking for ways around the PLCAA's restrictions. Some may continue trying to use broad claims to test the boundaries of the law. But for now, this unanimous 9-0 decision from the Supreme Court sends a strong and clear message. All 9 justices, across the ideological spectrum, agreed that this type of lawsuit cannot proceed. It's a rare moment of unity on an issue as often debated as gun policy, and one that reinforces the legal shield Congress put in place for firearm manufacturers. As more developments unfold, especially if this ruling begins to influence other legal battles, we'll continue to monitor the impact and keep you informed. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, feel free to leave a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on important legal cases and firearm-related issues.